What's up guys, and welcome back to yet another League of Legends video. In this video we will be grouping up every top lane champion into a certain playstyle, just like we did with the jungle video that I released about 2 weeks ago I think. In that video we made sure that if you played a jungler and you like that playstyle but you wanted to expand your pool and try something else but that played a bit similar to your main, you would have an easy time finding a champion you'd like. And now we've done the same for top lane. I want to preface this video, like I did in the other one, where I say that this is not a list where I say that the top champions are better than the champions below. This is not that type of tier list. There are plenty of patch by patch tier list that gets released on YouTube that pro players make and they give out to the community. That is not what this is about. This is about you enjoying a certain champion and you want to play something different or something similar, but you want to try something new and you want to have an easy time finding that. So I'll go through the category one by one and we will place the top lane champions. Now, something that I got in the last video, as I just repositioned my mic a bit here, was what about Lulu jungle? What about X jungle? And I don't have every champion here obviously, because not every champion is a top laner. There is something that was invented over 10 years ago, and it was called the Renekton test. And the Renekton test is a simple way of knowing if a champion is playable in top lane. Let's say you had Jinx. You think to yourself, okay, Jinx has a lot of range, Quinn has a lot of range, they are sort of similar. I want to play Jinx top lane. The Renekton test would pair Jinx up against Renekton. Do you think Jinx would survive that lane? She has her chompers, she has a slow, she outranges him. Do you think Jinx would survive the Renekton test? I don't think so. I think Renekton can go Ghost, I think Renekton can go PTA, and he can dive Jinx 10 times over without jungle assistance. Therefore, Jinx does not qualify to play top lane because she has failed the Renekton test. You have certain AD carries, even supports, that play top lane, but they offer something that either helps them in lane or makes it extremely hard for a champion like Renekton to abuse them. You have Tahm Kench. Tahm Kench is a support champion in design, but he is played top lane because he can survive. He survives the Renekton test. Same for Vayne, Akshan, Quinn. These are now staples of top lane because they can actually lane. Try to avoid comments like, what about Senna top lane? It wouldn't work, she wouldn't survive the test. So let's stick with these champions, and if you have certain questions about other champions that you feel might work, they're probably going to be in this very first category of a very niche but doable. This is a category of champions that you don't see very often in top lane, that doesn't have a very high pick rate, but that actually works. You can lane and you can play the playstyle that that champion offers. You're not gonna see them very often, and I'm gonna place them and we can take a look at them individually. Okay, I think I can zoom in a bit here. I think it would help the video. So, and just like last time, we have a few points that we can take a look at. So in the very niche but doable list, we have Tahm Kench, lane bully that's only strong in the early to mid game, or whenever Riot fucks up and buffs him for no reason, only to later nerf him again for the same reason. We all know every year Tahm Kench gets a top lane meta when Riot feels like he isn't being played, and then they go back on that meta because he becomes too strong. Right now he is S tier with 52% win rate, and he has about a 4% pick rate. So he's actually pretty strong and could arguably move out of this. But whenever they nerf him, he will drop out of this list and he will go back to being very niche but doable. Zac. Same as Tahm Kench, but scales better as a team fighter. You abuse your sustain and base damage in lane to make life miserable for no sustain melee champions without dashes. Then you have Briar, one of the best early melee stat checkers. Can have a tough laning phase and risk of being kited, but scales decently well into the mid to late game. I like to think of Briar as sort of an reverse Shen. Now Shen can ult away to save a team member, Briar can ult away to affect the team fight in the exact same way. And then we have Lilia. Lilia is a really good pick into low mobility melee champions. She has good base damage, good movement speed, she's very safe and she scales. Her split push and tower taking is really bad, but Lilia wants to team fight either way, so that doesn't really stop her. And then you have Lee Sin. Now Lee Sin receives buffs to his W and his sustain, so he kinda works now. Unusual as a top laner, but works. Gore Drinker or Eclipse Rush, and putting extra point in your E early to make sure that you can always get push priority. He's playable into anything, but he gets outscaled, just like Lee Sin jungle. And then we have Udyr. Go watch Trick2G's stream. Udyr can be whatever you want, AP mage, assassin, split pusher, team fighter, anything. That man makes Udyr the best champion in the game. But you have to be really good at him and really get involved with the playstyle of Udyr. You have some tough matchups in lane, but if you're good enough on him, you can win most of them. Probably the best user of runes in the entire lane, because he can almost pick anything and make a playstyle out of it. And then we're gonna move on to the late scalers with safe laning. Now these are champions that scale, but are weak in the early game, but as they get a recall or 2 recalls off, they become stronger and they can now start trading with you. And here we're going to place Ryze, Kayle and Vladimir. And let's take a look at some points about them. Now, Ryze. Very safe laning phase with the help of phase rush and teleport. You can always run away from a fight with the keystone. Once you have your components, you can start a trade and do good damage. Scales really hard with both AP and mana armor. Kayle is the same as Ryze. You actually win level 1 with lethal tempo versus a lot of champions when you stack your passive. With good wave management, you can reach level 6 risk-free and get your range form and scale up. Focus on only farming, as fighting too much is difficult. You have high mana costs early. Her W isn't really a spell, it's like 55 base heal. It's not even worth using. Kayle becomes a monster at 11 and 16 in the right matchups. Now, Kayle is a bit difficult in higher elos because people will not allow you to touch the wave. So if you're in anywhere between bronze and emerald, you can actually make Kayle's early game work pretty risk-free in the right matchups. And as long as you're practiced on her, you can even win some of them. And then we have Vladimir, probably the hardest scaler in the game. Unlike Ryze and Kayle, Vlad can trade early with most champions. You out-sustain everyone, but people will look to punish you, and you can solo win teamfights later. The sweet spot for Vladimir is once you reach level 9, because that's when your Q is maxed out and you start to heal a lot and you do a lot of damage with it. And then we have the risky for top but huge reward. These are mechanically difficult champions that are hard to pull off, but if you do, you can have an extremely easy mid game ahead of you. Alright, we have Yone, Yasuo, Rengar and Akali, and here are some points about them. Yone, very solid laning phase, great poke and engage tools, scales really well and becomes a side lane monster. He has some insanely hard matchups that only work if you are really good at him, and not everyone is Jukil. Yone has everything that Yasuo lacks in terms of safety, which makes him better suited for top lane. He has this Kraken Hullbreaker build that he goes right now, where he becomes extremely tanky in the side lane while still dealing a lot of damage. And then you have Yasuo, same as Yone but worse because very few top lane champions are projectile based, so his W has no value on top of being a very high cooldown. Works as a counter pick against Gnar and similar champions in good hands, as skilled Yasuo can lane versus anyone, and when you make good use out of your runes, you can scale very well as a top laner with lethal tempo, coming in mind. There's also a Grasp Yasuo playstyle where you are a bit tankier, but you deal a bit less damage. And then we have Rengar. Very hard mechanically to pull off. You put full trust in your ability to take good fights. Dekar makes Rengar top look easy, but if you misstep versus basically any bruiser, you are easily killable. Unless you're planning on taking AD carries to the grave every minute or so, Rengar works as a fantastic split pusher with extremely high tower damage. And then you have Akali. Now Akali has kind of fallen from grace in the top lane. When she was reworked, she was a top laner's worst nightmare. Now she is easily manageable. You can win some melee fights, you lose some. There's a lot of different builds that can make her viable, but her push is not the best. There's a big difference between mid and top Akali. She's best picked into squishies because she can actually kill those. And then you have the weak early, but spikes hard later. Now all these champions can have a good laning phase, but versus the majority of the top lane roster, they can have a tough time. If you're extremely good at them, their early laning phase becomes more manageable, and then you will spike earlier. Alright, we have Nasus, Garen, Camille, Gwen, K'Sante, Singed and Sylas. And here are some points about them. Nasus, weak early game when it comes to the classic AD playstyle with Q stacks, but he has ways of circumventing extremely bad lanes with the Emax playstyle, even though that is a bit weaker in the mid game. Spikes really hard at Divine Sunderer and wrecks most melee champions in a straight up 1v1. You don't need 1000 stacks to win the game. 400 to 600 is good enough to bonk down towers quickly and stat check other top laners. And then you have Garen. He's the same as Nasus, where you are weak early game, but you have different spikes throughout the early to mid game. Berserker's power spike, because you get to wave clear fast now. Stride breaker, hull breaker. Garen's sustain in lane is his biggest tool, and his insane wave clear. You don't have to be ahead to win on Garen, you just have to not fall behind. Only loses late game against hyperscalers like Fiora or similar. And then you have Camille. Camille is a bit of a ticking time bomb. She is a lane bully in some lanes, she's bullied in others. Being good at Camille means you play the waves good and you make up for your lack of early wave clear. Past one item, you can 1v1 anyone, and every item you add brings the game further and further into your favor. Split push Camille or teamfight Camille are both viable. And then we have Gwen. She's the same as Camille, she's either a bully or she gets bullied in most matchups. She can take over the game past 2 items, magic resistance itemization for bruisers sucks, and Gwen takes good advantage of that. Then you have K'Sante, get Iceborne, Gauntlet, you win, fight, blah blah blah, you all know what K'Sante is. Absolute abomination of a champion. Then we have Singed. Now Singed is one of the most unique champions in the game, because he has an entire playstyle made for him. Sucks early into hard melee matchups, but the game switches once he gets Rylai's. Now he becomes the bully. A good Singed absorbs so much pressure for himself that his team can play risk-free without fear. And then you have Sylas. Works well versus low damage top laners that he can fight and out-sustain them. Sylas is the best statistical counter to Malphite because you use his ultimate better than he can. And then you have the immobile powerhouses. These are champions without dashes that aren't very fast, but you can bring people to you and you can outfight them most of the time. And here we're going to place Illaoi, Cho'Gath, Mundo, Sion, Mordekaiser Set, Olaf and Urgot. Illaoi. The current playstyle of Illaoi is to build Iceborne Gauntlet and Hullbreaker and never leave the side lane. She has the power to bully lanes under tower with good tentacle placement and her E. She makes it really hard to all in her, and she's difficult to deal with in a side lane. She's not unbeatable though, as most people think. Cho'Gath and Dr. Mundo. Same playstyle where they can play safe early and get heartsteal and just get too tanky for bruisers to solo kill. You have great sustain in lane, hard to kill because of the CC they have, and serves as a frontline for their team. Not great engaged champions. Then you have Sion. Many playstyles where you can go lethality, tank, bruiser. You can play to deny the enemy laner or just get ahead of them with the Baus FFS playstyle. of the Inting Scion. Very versatile champion, but his game impact falls off without an early lead, and he just loses hard versus some champions like Gwen, Camille or Fiora. And then we have Mordekaiser. Very similar to Garen, where he has some matchups where he can bully someone, and some where he just gets destroyed. He's best picked into melee dashless champions, and where he can remove a big carry from a fight with his ult. Set. Mix of Garen and Mordekaiser. He's capable of bullying or going even, he can split push and he can teamfight. He does good into a front to back team comp where he can ult the front line into the back line and cause chaos. His sustain with Doran's shield and second wind is only matched by Garen, it seems. And Olaf works very well as a counter pick into some champions and can really punish players who disrespect his damage. He is very reliant on having his summoner spells up to teamfight or pressure because he's too slow without them. He loses value as the game goes longer and needs to have a strong early mid game. And then we have Urgot. Strong laning phase into some champions and can farm versus most. Scales decently well into the mid and late game and is one of the best Black Cleaver users thanks to his W applying all stacks of it very fast. Unless very far ahead, he's kinda bad in a side lane because he's slow and can get collapsed on very easily, and most of his damage, if not all of it, is single target only. And then we have the lane bullies that are ranged, the most hated class of any top laner. Alright, we have Teemo, Kennen, Akshan, Quinn and Vayne. Teemo, along with Udyr, one of the best keystones and rune users in the top lane. Fleet, Grasp, Dark Harvest, anything. Teemo has a million playstyles and most of them work. One of the best Teemos in EU Challenger rushes Swifties with Fleet and almost never pokes the enemy top laner. He just perma pushes waves into tower. You beat some champions hard, but others can beat you. Emax, Nasus, Gragas, Ornn, Cho'Gath does very well into Teemo. He's not as bad to lane against as he was in say season 3, season 4. Now it's a bit more manageable. And then you have Kennen. Not a very popular champion unless AP items are busted or riot buffs Kennen. Ranged poke, denies CS from the enemy and gain a lead by doing that. Has control of the wave as long as he's stronger than the enemy carry. Can lose some lanes and is pretty weak into tanks because he can't kill them very fast. He's a powerful team fighter if ahead, otherwise he's a bit of an overgrown rat like Teemo that does very little. Then we have Akshan. He's a really good ranged lane bully that's strong early and gets stronger as the game goes. Early poke lane that transitions into a shove wave and roam playstyle. Other lanes never expect Akshan to be lurking nearby and he gets fed very easily this way. It's like playing against pre-rework Pantheon that pokes you from range until you can't lane anymore and impacts other lanes fast. Sucks into engaged champions because they can smash his face in. And then we have Quinn. Nobody moves around the map like Quinn does when she has her ult. The map pressure that you can create as a Quinn player can make objectives free to take for your team. Quinn has a playstyle where she's either strong enough to assassinate you or she is not. In either case, she should be able to go from lane to lane and push waves and force someone to respond. Can bully certain lanes hard and she can lose some matchups pretty hard. In any way, she should be able to farm out most lanes. And lastly we have Vayne. One of the best 1v1 champions in the game because of how good her kit is. She's ranged, a dash, a knockback and stealth and true damage. In the top lane however, the Vayne gets exposed. You don't have a support. If you're not good enough, you can't play Vayne top because you will get punished. Overstep and you get flashed on or ghosted on. You take a bad trade and you can't come back because you lack sustain. Use E 2-3 times and you're out of mana. She's high risk, high reward, but you lack a frontline most likely and you won't be able to carry as hard as AD carry Vayne with a team around her. And then we're gonna move towards the lane bullies that are melee. Alright, and here we have them. We got Darius, Gnar, Rumble, Pantheon, Naafiri, Kled and Shen. Now Darius, everyone knows what Darius is and what he does. Powerful early game, somewhat lackluster mid game, and he's a decent late game if he's left unchecked in fights. Deal a lot of damage, you know the deal. Gnar. Why is he in the melee bully category? He's ranged, right? Because second wind and Doran's shield mitigate a lot of Mini Gnar's playstyle and his auto poke. But Mega Gnar just fucks you up straight up. because whenever Riot feels that Gnar isn't being played, Mega Gnar gets a buff. Good laning phase, good team fights, just get used to his rage bar and when to go Mega. And then you have Rumble. Rumble is not the same champ in pro play as he is in solo queue. Rumble needs to be used in a 2v2 fight or more. He's powerful there and he does a lot of damage throughout the entire game, but in solo queue he feels a bit lackluster because teams are not coordinated and can't play around him and his ult. In solo queue, Rumble has to gain a lead early and use magic pen items to win, otherwise he's just useless and will be towered over 24/7. Pantheon. Classic lane bully, spam Q on enemy and all in once they are low enough. Has many skill matchups that can go his way, you gain a lead top and you ult to other lanes to expand your leads to your teammates. Naafiri, very popular top lane when she was first released, now I see less of her, but she wants to poke and go all in. She has some matchups where she can stomp and kite someone, and she sucks versus tanks because their armor becomes too effective. Kled. He either fucks you up or you fuck him up, there's no in between. He has some matchups where he is really good, but only if you're an actual Kled main, which there's almost none. 1.6% pick rate means you might see one Kled every 100 games. His Q is easy to dodge, he can't control his W, and his R is pretty good. A Kled who's ahead is hard to stop. A Kled who's behind is useless, but that goes for most top laners. Shen. His early game has been completely shafted, and he has gone from a very good lane bully to he will only bully you in lane if you disrespect him. He does not fit in any other category. He's mostly used to stabilize top lane versus strong champions and slowly lose the lane instead of being smashed and completely open up the lane like other champions. Ultimate is very powerful in a protect the carry comp, and he's better into auto attack based champions like Tryndamere than AD caster type champions like Renekton because of his W. And then we have the split push 99%. These are champions that in 99% of cases wants to be in a side lane and just create pressure. They're not very good in team fights, but if they have to team fight, they can, but it's not very good. Alright, here we have Yorick, Jax, Tryndamere, Irelia and Trundle. Yorick. The entire plan with Yorick is to slowly overwhelm your opponent with ghouls and lane pressure. You deal a lot of damage, you are decently tanky for a 1v1, 1v2, and you can really pressure a side lane. He has some matchups where it's simply not playable if both laners are on equal level, like Irelia, because she can one-shot his ghouls and stack her passive, and just wreck his face in. And then you have Jax. He's in a weird state right now because of the mythics, where he's building half for teamfighting and half for the 1v1. But in theory, he is a split pushing 1v1 champion. Jax beats almost every auto attack based melee champion in the game, provided that you are skilled with him and you scale like a monster. Then you have Tryndamere. He outsustains most champions in the early game and can RNG win good and bad matchups. Tryndamere's perfect world is only split pushing, but some champions are really good at stat checking him, like Poppy or Malphite. There are builds and playstyles with him that circumvent those matchups. You kill everyone that you're stronger than, and you can take complete control of a side lane. Now Irelia is a bit controversial because she might not even be in this category, but I'm gonna place her here anyways, and I'll explain why later. But she has some matchups that she dumpsters early with her passive, and some that are just unplayable. Irelia becomes hard to deal with past Blade of the Ruined King and could probably be in the return on investment tier that we're gonna talk about later. But she has too many flaws that are exploitable, like a weak early wave clear versus champions that wants to fight you because they can test the minion wave, mana issues into hard lanes, and no great mythic synergy. We will talk a bit more about this later. You have Trundle, very good into melee champions, outsustains most of them, and his DPS and stickiness is undervalued. Chomps down turrets like there's no tomorrow, destroys tanks past one item, but his wave clear sucks and he needs Tiamat. He can have some mana issues in the early game. And now we're gonna move towards the solid blind pick champions. Champions that you can blind pick every game and you have decent matchups versus anyone. Alright, In this tier we have Renekton, Aatrox, Volibear and Gragas. Renekton, overall a strong early game champion that can either snowball very hard or go even versus anyone. Does not really have bad matchups and every lane is winnable. Strongest 2v2 champion in the top lane. A top lane champion needs to survive the Renekton test that we talked about in the beginning in order to be viable in the top lane, and it's for a good reason. This champion will F you up if you really disrespect him. And then you have Aatrox. In a similar style to Renekton, but not as good. You can still lane versus most champions or go even, and look to be useful later in teamfights. Has more counter matchups that are straight up unplayable if both are equally skilled, like Fiora or Tryndamere. And then you have Volibear. He has multiple playstyles and build that makes him versatile. Can Emax and one-shot waves, and be a side lane menace. He can win extended fights with WMAX and Divine. He's just a solid champion. He can be punished, but he has the potential to at least always go even if you don't make any big mistakes on him. And then you have Gragas. This is my most hated champion in the top lane. He has wave clear, he has sustain, extremely short cooldowns, can poke you down, all in you or kite you forever. It's hard to all in a Gragas with a lot of ability haste and phase rush because he can just run away. You can never get a huge lead versus a good Gragas player. They will always deny you. And then we have the teamfight engage and disengage champions. Here we have Malphite, Ornn, Maokai, Poppy and Wukong. Malphite, very good versus AD champions, can straight up win 1v1s with Iceborne Gauntlet, but he's very ult reliant. He has different playstyles with Grasp or Comment, WMAX or QMAX. All in all, he's very good at just shutting down an AD solo laner. And then you have Ornn, very solid laning phase. If this category did not exist, Ornn would be in the blind pick category, because he has good laning phase versus anyone. But Ornn ult is just too good in a teamfight setting, in both directions, either defensively or offensively. His scaling is good for his team, he can hold his own in a side lane, he's very solid as a champion. And then you have Maokai. He's the same as Malphite, but he works well versus AP champions because of item synergies. Very ult reliant, but he has a good laning phase. Poppy. Great counter pick to Irelia, Renekton, any champion that wants to dive in. Great damage with Iceborne Gauntlet, good team fights and great laning phase. Nobody expects the amount of damage that Poppy can dish out. They always disrespect her all-in potential. And lastly we have Wukong. Very good into low mobility carries that can't deal with his ultimate. He has great all-in potential and can surprise with how tanky he can be while still dealing a lot of damage. He's not as popular in the top lane as he once was because his kit isn't very up to date to deal with the modern laning phase. He can still work if you're really good at him, but he's mostly used as a counter pick. And then we have the highest return on investment. These champions, these 4 champions, they are not better top laners than any other champion you see on this list. These are just champions that give you more for the effort that you put in learning them. They are the hardest mechanical champions in top lane, and that is for a good reason. They can win you the game solely based on how good you are with them. Let's place them out and see who they are. Alright, we have Gangplank, Jace, Fiora and Riven. And arguably you could put Irelia here. I'm not gonna do that though, because I feel like she has issues that these 4 don't have. And we're gonna take a look at them now. Gangplank. Probably the hardest champion in the game to master 100%. Your laning phase on GP reflects exactly how good you are as a player. Everything from barrel placement to poke, team fighting to cross map ulting, a good Gangplank maybe uses 60% of the champion's potential. A great Gangplank maybe 85%. Even Solar Baka, who's probably the best GP in the world, says he doesn't use 100% of the champion. Nobody uses GP to the fullest, and that's why he's so rewarding to play. There's always room for improvement. You know what Gangplank does in teamfights, there's no need to add more. Then you have Jace. He has all the tools in the game to win. Ranged form for farming and poke, melee for fighting. A good Jace player is impossible to lane against or go even with. Mid Jace is a bit more rewarding than top, for the same reasons as Naafiri, because of top laners' easy access to armor. But top Jace is still one of the hardest champions in the game to master. And then you have Fiora, 1v1 specialist that excels at split pushing, pressuring objectives and simply being unkillable straight up. Just like Trundle, you need Tiamat, but the mobility, the damage, the W parry, the ultimate, the vitals, just like Gangplank, Fiora can never truly be mastered, but is still very rewarding at a high level. Has early game and late game rune pages for whatever situation, extremely solid champion. And lastly we have Riven. Riven is the original high mechanical top lane champion that can never really be mastered to 100%. The combos, the animation cancelling that you need to do on this champion is the bare minimum. Once you add macro into the equation, once you add lane matchups into the equation, Riven becomes one of the hardest champions in the game. One of the best snowballers in League of Legends because how you can move on the map. Her only downside is that if you don't play her at a high level, she really does not do much of anything. She's just there. Other champions can do more with less effort, but she still belongs in this category thanks to her kit. Now, let's summarize here. This is not a list again that says that Ornn is a better champion than Rumble. But if you enjoy playing Ornn and you want to play something else, you might enjoy these champions because they are very similar. Same if you are a Jax player. Let's say you're tired of Jax's early mana issues. Tryndamere plays an exact same playstyle as Jax. You might want to try him out. Maybe you're a fan of Illaoi and she's getting banned a lot because people don't like to play versus her. You have all these champions that play similar to her. This is the point of this list. I would like to know if you have a champion that isn't in this list and where you would place them. I know for sure that back in the day I used to play a lot of Master Yi with 3 points in my W and a Dormant's Ring, because that meant you can always out-sustain everything in lane and you can stay in lane forever. But nowadays you can't really do that. But let me know if you have some picks that you would place into a certain tier. Let me know if you disagree with some of my placements. I'm always up to learn something. Obviously I don't master all of these champions, this is just a tier list at the generic level, but let me know if you would change something. But this has been it for this video. I hope you learned something, I hope you find this tier list helpful, and I will see you in the next one. I will probably do a support or AD carry list next. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to not miss out for that video. Goodbye.